welcome to a very different Voices on the Edge of Change podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined with four amazing people that are going to take us through, I think, quite an interesting debate about AI, the environment, well-being, sustainability, and everything that we're possibly considering, worrying and loving about all the new technology that's coming our way, but particularly around the changes that we're going to be making. And if anybody is listening to this that may have come to the Dare to Be Different conference with Differentis, you will know that this was quite a lively podcast, or a live, I should say, panel that we did up at Alston Towers. But what we wanted to do here was to effectively recreate a conversation that we had a few months ago, back in March 2025, when I delivered the Impact Summit. And we wanted to offer this as a bonus to anyone that had either missed out or had come and wanted to listen again from the Dare to Be Different conference. So absolutely delighted to take this podcast to a completely different level and have lots of guests, which has been quite different to my modus operandi so far. So without further ado, I would like everybody to just give me a minute or so on who they are. So if I start with Dave, thank you for hosting us at the Dare to Be Different conference. What a wonderful event that was. And I know that we were totally thrilled to be with you again. The great team. And that's all because of your drive and determination, really, to get people to think out the box. So do you want to give us a little bit about Differentis and why you've done that and for the purpose of what you're trying to achieve?
Of course. Thanks, Lou. Hello, everybody. Good to be here. Hello. Differentis. We are 25 years old this year, which is why we did the expo recently. We really wanted to not just celebrate where we've got to as an organisation and all the great change and transformations we've done, but also recognise that in 25 years, so from 2000 to this year, how much has changed in the technology world, how much has changed in the world generally, and to start seeing some of those practical applications come to life. We've got AI coming now, lots of challenging conversations around it, but I think what this panel did really well back at Impact Summit and again at the Expo is to talk around how can we take some of those nebulous concepts, sometimes some of the very polarized views, and turn it into a bit more of a practical debate. And as we said at the Impact Summit and again at the Expo, it is about having that debate. It's not about whether something's right or wrong, or we talked about in the past, black or white. There's lots of grey areas, and we need to bring back that art of debate. We've lost it in so many parts of our lives, and this is why this panel's so great, because it's not just a pure technology view. It's bringing lots of different viewpoints together. And I think we should probably rerun it again next year, because every time we do this, every 6 months, the world's moved on. So we can do it as an annual thing. That'd be awesome.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. I think we'd all be up for that. But let's, before we get deep into a debate again, which I'm sure will be lively, but why don't we kick off with some introductions? So thanks, Dave, for your introduction. I'd like to bring in Jayne Manley at this point. Now, Jayne and I, for the sake of the podcast, have known each other a couple of years now. And although Jayne is doing completely different things, I think it is worth pointing out that you were the CEO of Earth Trust, and with quite an authority on environmental issues and sustainability. You're in the middle of building, what I'm noticing anyway, and just wish I lived around the corner to you, the most stunning flower farm, and your artistic skills on how you display your flowers, I just want to say, is just stunning. We could all learn a thing or two from you. But anyway, I'd love you to just give us a little bit of background into who Jayne is.
Yes, and welcome, and it's lovely to be back here with you all. So I've spent about 25, 30 years working for the environment in lots of different forms, in lots of different places. So I've worked for government, I've worked for a government agency, I've worked in the charitable sector. So I've got a really diverse background in terms of the environment, and environment is my bag. I'm caring for the planet, making sure that we develop as societies and our health and well-being develops, and we thrive here on this planet whilst we're developing and safeguarding the planet. That's what I'm about. And now I set up SunnyHill Consultants, and we work at the intersect between business, development, growth, and the environment. And the environment is defined as the natural resources that we all rely on. It's defined as the natural world and the wildlife that maintains the health and well-being of the planet. So everything that you might think about, whether it's wildlife, whether it's land use, whether it's carbon and a low carbon agenda, all of that needs to be brought to the fore when we're talking about how we develop as a society and how we thrive together on the planet. So my interventions are strategic. I tend to operate at board, but I also operate at project level when people are considering new interventions or they're considering developments and they want to explore the best possible sustainable solutions for themselves, their businesses and the planet.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And I know that at the Impact Summit, particularly that we did in March, there was quite a lot of noise when you spoke, that sort of whispering to the person next to them of things that you mentioned that people just really had not, and really not been on their radar, not thought about, and you just brought quite a lot of interesting perspective. So I'm looking forward to that in the podcast today. And Petra and I go quite way back. We're going to declare our colours as ex-BBC people here. Petra and I came together, for those of you who haven't heard anything about us, Petra and I came together because I was working on the culture change programme at the BBC, and Petra was looking at how we were going to roll out AI across the BBC, but particularly from a governance and policy point of view, and making sure that we were ethical and that we were dealing with it with integrity and against our values. And we came together through a conversation really of that work, and I think we became quite a good double act actually at our exco meetings and stuff when we were trying to rally the best part of 20,000 people to understand how they may or may not be using AI at the BBC. So Petra, I'm absolutely delighted that you're here with me again today. I don't want to let go of you. Would you like to tell everyone what you're still doing there and what you've been doing, and where you land on all things AI right now?
Thanks, Lou. I'm really happy to be part of this, and thanks for a really great discussion recently on this. At the BBC, I guess things have changed a lot, I would say, since you've left. I think things were moving in that direction anyway. I think when I came into the space, basically, especially at the BBC, it was only really sort of data scientists, a few software engineers and things that really cared about that sort of AI space, responsible use space. Even though AI was being used by lots of people, it wasn't really affecting them. They didn't really understand that they were using it. But then with everything happening with generative AI, then suddenly everyone at the BBC sort of was confronted with what that meant for them, like overnight. And so suddenly from that few hundred people sort of being involved in what we do, it went to over 20,000 people. And I would say at the BBC now, what we're doing, I'm in the responsible AI team, and our kind of remit is to sort of empower teams to be able to use AI in a responsible way, which means in line with the BBC's values and also our legal and regulatory obligations, and making sure that how they're using AI is also sort of supports our sort of strategic objectives of the BBC. I think one important thing is always about sort of making sure that why what you're doing, you're using AI for, not just AI for AI's sake, but there's actual purpose to it. And I think a lot of what we're doing is trying to build that culture, it's not easy. It's really not easy, because this is a massive shift for people in thinking about what they're doing, how they're doing it. And at the BBC, we always have competing priorities. There's lots of other things going on, people at different stages of their adoption journey and things. So we're doing a lot of work to get people to sort of think about the value, understand the technology, experiment with it, and then see where it goes, whether it is of value or not.
Thank you. Yes, and I never think there's a dull day at the BBC, Petra. I'm sure things move very quickly. But again, always very interesting when you're trying to talk about the culture and then you're trying to deliver to, as I know at the BBC, many, many different cultures within a culture. This affects everybody. This is probably one of the biggest changes that we're facing in society, that actually nobody in any country, regardless of the technology that they do or don't use, can escape. And I think that's something that we'll be unpicking as we dive in. But before we dive in, let's go to another wonderful person who I also met through being on a panel many moons ago. And we got to know each other and we keep bumping into each other. And thanks to Ash, I'm now using this software. This is our first time. For anyone who's been watching Voices on the Edge of Change on YouTube, you will see quite a different look and feel to my podcast, but that's all down to Dr. Ashwin Mehta, who I am delighted is with us again. And I know you've been helping my own curiosity and learning into this subject. So without further ado, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro to you?
Sure. Thanks, Lou, and hi, everybody. Thanks for coming together and having this debate today. But if you're watching, thanks for tuning in. So my name is Ashwin Mehta. I run an AI and tech consulting business called Methodology, and we do end-to-end. So from leadership visioning and strategy through to a technical selection, build and deployment, looking at data strategy and also looking at things like skills and literacy programs. Do a lot of public speaking, do fractional work, all of that stuff. But really the emphasis is on demystifying the market and moving businesses towards an idea of purposeful deployment of artificial intelligence alongside human hierarchies. So the question usually is, AI is a big scary thing. Where do we start? How do we start? How do we define our purpose? And then how do we move forward in a way that brings value? So that's end-to-end pretty much what we do. The business has been around for 3 years. Personally, I have an MBA and a PhD in technology adoption, statistical modeling. I've done machine learning on neural network applications. We build it all. We do it all. End to end.
Right. Well, as anyone listening in can hear, that I really have the most phenomenal panel and the most amazing thought leaders and experience. So I'm not going to hold up this podcast any longer with any more introductions. I think we've got 4 big questions that we want to tackle on this podcast. So I think we should dive straight in and sort of ground ourselves with the fact that we are in this huge world of pace of change. We talk about it a lot, the fact that we're probably at the fastest but yet the slowest time we've ever been, that it's going to speed up exponentially, that the promise of innovation plus risk is really high. Our knowledge bank and the way that we are supposed to continue to learn is being driven to be faster and faster. The HR landscape, which we'll come to at some point in this conversation, is changing massively. And, I can say that my original goal and plan of retiring at 50 didn't quite happen. And here we are. So, people are working longer. In fact, I saw somebody say that they were still working at 97 on LinkedIn today. So there you go. So whether we're actually talking about healthcare, energy, education, finance, whatever we're in, really, whatever game we're in, AI is shifting the conversation, it's shifting the workplace, it's shifting the way that we do and think about business right across the board. So, what I'd really like to get into is, what do you think the biggest opportunities are for us and perhaps the risk now? And how do we lead responsibly in this space, with things like sustainability, equality, long-term thinking, and perhaps what we need to prepare next as leaders. So that's sort of where we're going to take the conversation today. But with that, I think I'm going to start with Petra and put you on the spot first, Petra, because in the last few years, as I've said, we've seen the conversation move hugely in the AI arena. And I think, one of the things we might say, and if people were listening to this might sort of be nodding at this point, is that anytime somebody seems to mention AI, we seem to talk a lot about the AI harm, the fact that it's sort of deepened in the conversation we're hearing. We're hearing more about unintentional, but also intentional consequences as a result of AI. In fact, Dan Taylor-Watt, who was at the Impact Summit, interestingly, with us in March, made 10 predictions of what he thought would happen this year. If you look at Dan Taylor-Watt's LinkedIn page, you will see that he put up a post a while ago about the 10 things that he thought were going to happen with AI. And interestingly, but guess what? 8 of them have already happened in less time than he predicted. So we're getting into this world of unintended and intended movement around AI. And along that comes understanding, which is great, and we understand the tech itself. But Petra, from your perspective, where do you think the red flags are now, and how are industries responding? What's your view on that?
So I would say one of the big sort of concerns is probably the pace of change. It's one of the opportunities, but it's also one of the concerns, because I think things are moving so fast, and that people aren't really sitting back and thinking, what does this actually mean for me? It feels like there's a bit of a sort of everyone feeling. I mean, I think we said it the last time that we spoke, and this sort of a recurring theme, that basically it's like FOMO, fear of missing out, is becoming a strategy. And it's not, and it shouldn't be. But because things are moving so quickly, everyone's seeing AI everywhere around them. Everyone's talking about it. The hype is real and large. Everyone wants to make sure that they're using it so they don't get seen to be out of touch or left behind. And I think a lot of organizations haven't really considered, what is it that they're trying to do? What is a problem they're trying to solve? What is a value they're trying to achieve? And also, even if you've thought about all those things, what does it mean for the people in your organization? Because you might have, AI might be a great solution to a problem, but you also have to think about it's a technology that a lot of people aren't familiar with. There's implications to its use, there's understanding, there's skills gaps, there's all of these things. You have to bring the people on with it. Just because the solution might the technical solution might be great, doesn't mean the people are on board with it or at the space to adopt it. So there's all these things to really make sure that you don't sort of lose sight of your people in the organization as you sort of go ahead with the technology. And I think, especially in this country, I think there's a lot of sort of, you look at the press, there's a lot of sort of concerning headlines about the use of AI, and so it gives people a lot of fear around it. So I think that's something that it's not easy just to use the technology and not address everyone's concerns, whether they're right or wrong. So I would say that's definitely one of the big things to think about is the pace of change, and people to really think about what it is they're trying to achieve. Because what we'll also say in responsible use, sometimes the most responsible use of AI can also be no use of AI. And so really think about whether AI is the actual solution that's best for this. And then I think another thing that is one of the concerns for us at the BBC is that at the BBC, trust is basically our lifeblood. It's paramount to everything that we do. Now, if people don't trust us, then who are we as an organization? And one of the things that we've sort of found, I don't know if you've seen, but we did like some research at the end of last year, which was basically about sort of AI assistance in sort of looking at BBC News output. And it was researching how AI assistants were reporting BBC News output. So for example, it was finding, so for example, that if you go to some AI assistants, you might ask it something and it gives a source as BBC News. Sometimes those sources were incorrectly attributed to the BBC and weren't actually from the BBC. And then sometimes actual direct text was rightly attributed to the BBC, but was actually factually incorrect, and it wasn't what the BBC said. Yeah. So it's things like that. So, because of disintermediation, third-party sort of tools are basically saying that the BBC has said something the BBC didn't necessarily say, and is also saying, so we don't even have power and control over what is being attributed to us. And so that is seriously concerning, because audiences could be like, I saw that on the BBC, and then they think,
I mean, Petra, the conversations having left the BBC, particularly in the last 2 years, and unfortunately because of these two horrendous wars, which we won't talk about in the podcast, obviously, but, there are two there's many wars, but the two that are really front and centre at the moment, verifying and fact-checking and understanding who's saying what and where is it coming from. I'll just give the example because I think it's so true about what you say about people trusting the BBC. When the Queen died at the BBC, I say we still, gosh, we didn't report that the Queen had died first. We actually were not the broadcaster to announce the Queen's death. And yet we had over 70 million hits, I think, on the website. I mean, I brought the website down because people's view was, well, if the BBC isn't saying it, then clearly it can't be true. The Queen hasn't died. And so I think that even now, regardless, the BBC is still the final sort of, is it true? And if that is happening, whether that's because of AI or anything else, then that's actually a real worry, isn't it? Because it's hard enough to report factual news and know where your sources are coming from, and then layered on top with AI. I mean, like I said at the beginning in the intro to you, and I'll say it again, your job is almost double or triply harder than anybody else trying to roll out AI in an organisation that isn't a broadcaster.
I think this whole issue isn't even just about us rolling out AI, because we might have not been, even if we're not using AI, this is happening to the BBC and other news organisations. Things have been attributed to them that are either inaccurate or were never actually said by them. And that's the thing. How can we influence that? How can we change that? How can we make sure that if somebody sees something out there and says it's from this news organization, that it's actually accurate, actually reflects what news organization said, and actually from the news organization? So I think that's one of the big issues.
And let me bring in here, and then I'll come to you, Dave. I'm just interested, Ash, given the work that you're doing as a consultant, where how would you like to respond to some of the things? What are you noticing to what Petra's saying?
So I think it's important that we're clear on exactly what we're talking about, because AI is too broad a field to make generalizations around things like accuracy or attribution and things like that. Now, if I was to say we're going to do a corporate implementation of something, we're going to treat our data in a particular way, we're going to configure our agents or assistants in a particular way, we're going to have workflows that are very targeted in their response and their output. All of these inaccuracy issues just don't exist. We can configure things so tightly that we don't get any of these issues. And that's a huge opportunity for this year and next year, because corporations moving away from, let's just give everybody ChatGPT or Copilot, everybody types in something into a chat interface, they get something out, great, we've done AI. That's the lowest hanging fruit possible. Moving towards intelligent systems that are part of the operating model of a business is a very different proposition. And it's important that when we're doing our governance, we're thinking about security, we're thinking about ethics, we're thinking about responsible AI principles. We're clear on which of these things we're talking about. The public going to ChatGPT versus a business having orchestrated workflows and tightly controlled agentic capability. They're very, very different things. And the issues are therefore very, very different. The challenges that come from some of this stuff are a lot of what Petra said are absolutely true. If you take the lowest end of the market, people working back and forth with a chat agent without verifying anything, of course, there are going to be issues. And the longer term issue, because time is also a factor, short term issues relate to job displacement, relate to fact checking, relate to the spread of misinformation. Longer term issues relate to things like watermarking, things like data validation, things like moving people from the jobs that they do today into different jobs. But that's not a short term proposition. So we need to be thinking differently about the short term and the long term in this space. Some of the risks that are around are to a large degree being addressed by things like responsible AI principles. But the longer term risks are really related to the dependencies that society and organizations have on outsourcing their cognitive capabilities. So if I as a person or me as an organization decides I'm never going to do any thinking ever again, I'm going to let the machine do it for me, then I'm not going to be good at these things in the future. And that's not only a future proposition, that's a now proposition, because if we think about model benchmarking, we think the latest and greatest model. So recently Grok 4 Super Heavy came out, really performing well on benchmarks, really performing well on things. The next model will come out and it'll be amazing. The next model will come out and it'll be amazing. Right, this is just going to keep happening. Why do we care? Most of the time, we're not really using these things to their fullest potential. But the reason we should care is when we think about workforce displacement, we think about, well, what are people good at? They're good at critical thinking. They're good at problem solving. No, I wouldn't say that's true. There is a normal distribution. Some people are amazing at these things and some people are terrible at these things. And then you have a spread of capabilities. And the thing we should be watching for is the mean of human capability. Is it greater than or less than the capability of the machine to do these things?
That's the frightening conversation that I recently heard on, dare I say it, Stephen Bartlett's podcast. But, you know, with the guru of AI, the guy who actually invented AI, George Hinton, you know, where he was saying at what point does AI become a superhuman intelligent, a more humanly intelligent than us? And actually, I came away from that podcast quite concerned about how we're going to keep our own. And I don't know whether we should get into this on this podcast because we might go down a rabbit hole. But, you know, I am actually going to be doing a podcast with Winford Dorr on this about neurointelligence versus AI intelligence. And actually, how do we keep ourselves fit for the future? Brain fit, you know, stave off Alzheimer's, dementia, all those things. If we become a society that totally relies on an artificial intelligence, then we're in trouble, I would think. Again, I mean, should I bring Dave in at this point? I don't feel qualified. I don't feel qualified to speak on this. I'm just talking about a layperson and what I'm noticing in podcasts, and I'm being curious by talking to wonderful people like you. I think it's a really interesting debate.
Well, we've gone on Matrix there. I was about to say yes, Mr. Anderson, when I started talking about So, just picking up that last point, I guess, Lou, if we bring that back into the workplace, because I think you, Ash, and Petra have all talked around sort of futures of jobs and displacement. And there's an interesting thing, I think, happening, certainly from a consulting perspective. If you look at some of the consulting firms, McKinsey have come out recently, they've got 12,000 agents built that they are using to support their consultants, which on the face of it is great. So as a consultant business ourselves, we talk around amplifying our consultants. How can we put technology in that means we can take one of our consultants and they can do 5 times, 10 times more of what they're doing without necessarily having to add lots more people. On the flip side of that, though, you've got a number of firms that are saying, actually, we're going to stop doing graduate programs. We are going to use AI to do a lot of this base level work where we bring in the next generation. And I think that's where you start thinking about long-term planning and you go, well, hang on, have you thought about the impact in the next 5 years, 10 years? Because the consultants you have now will be retiring. You've used AI to replace the bottom of your funnel. So how do the future graduates get the job skills and the experience to become your next consultants? Because you're not going to replace 100% of everything with technology, but if you're replacing those core roles that people use to learn, what happens when your top end do retire and leave the organisation? You've not got that throughput of people. What we're trying to do is try and get that balance right of, yes, we are absolutely fully behind technology that amplifies our people, but we're not looking to replace in its entirety any particular role. We won't take as many on, but we still need to keep a person presence, if you like, a pipeline of people at all levels, so you've got that throughput, so you've got longevity in your business. And some of the other things around truth and what can we rely on. Ash is right. If you are building AI solutions into your business using your business documentation, you might be more in the SLM space and the LLM space, but you can tightly control that. You can put security around that. Actually, truth is a bit tighter. But to Petra's point, that you've got that bottom end where people are just throwing stuff out there and thinking things are true that might not be. I don't actually think that's a technology issue. I think that's a society issue. We've had that for the start. The last 25 years, the birth of social media, that soundbite view of people, and back to that point of we're not learning enough to say, challenge something, debate it. I'll just check that before I really think it's true. Many people have got teenage kids. I've got 2 of them. And the amount of times something gets spurted out, they don't take and you go, okay, that feels a bit TikTok-y.
Yeah.
Have we checked it before we just throw that out there and try and encourage them? This is why things like teaching history is really important in schools, because of the learn about your sources. You need 3 sources that you can identify, then say it probably was true versus, well, hang on, I've got one source that says it was this, and I've got 57 sources over here that go, no, that's not right. So how do you build it? So one of the things we're looking at the moment is we are looking at take it higher education, and how do you confirm someone's got a degree? So on their CVs, people say, I've got a degree in XYZ from a university. From a UK point of view, the only way you can do that at the moment as an employer is you have to go onto a government portal, enter the details, you have to get permission from the student first to say they're allowing you to do this. So they can turn around and say, no, I'm not giving you permission. So you've got no way of actually checking what they've said on their CV about their education is true.
But surely, sorry, just with my cynical hat on here, if if you haven't got your degree, then you might be somebody who might not let you do that. But if you have the degree, why would you worry about somebody checking the portal?
So we are looking at some solutions around, can you architect truth a bit more using things like blockchain and unique identifiers in the higher education space that says I can check that, validate it without necessarily having to know person's individual details. So I use my code, etc. Therefore, I don't need permission. I can go and check it to validate it without causing any issues from a personal data leak and everything else. So there's lots of interesting things. And I think we broaden it out, not just about AI. AI is driving this conversation of what's true, what's not true. Who knows? We might already be in the matrix, but
yeah, no. And also, I think for the sake of the audience listening on the podcast, I've been in a conversation with the legal profession recently for different reasons, and one of their concerns is the same as yours about what you were saying, is all the top lawyers are going to go if we don't allow associate lawyers, article lawyers to come in from university to work their way up. And actually, why do you need them, ironically, at the moment? Because if you need a document researched, or my brother's a lawyer, I'll just give you an example where he was talking about he had to read something like a 450,000 pages of whatever, and he didn't have time. At least was able to get an executive summary, and he was able to get it while he was flying, and he said, that's somebody's job, or that would have been somebody's job. And I'm not saying that he could do the same as he could do with the information what he needed to do, and he may still have needed somebody to do it, but that bit of how quickly can I get the information and how quickly can I distill the information and still have an understanding of what it was I was supposed to be digesting, that's where it does great things. But then again, if you're not doing that as an article clerk or an associate lawyer, you can't therefore become a partner. So you therefore can't become the senior lawyer, right? And that's just the law firm. And I'm sure, if we go around the room here on the podcast, everyone would feel the same. But let me bring you to a question, Dave, before I move on to Jayne. But the question, along with what you've said and the conversation that we're having, are there any other big challenges, particularly with your eyes as a consultant out there, because you've got eyes on a lot of organisations, not just one in particular, like me in the media industry? What are you noticing, and what would be good for our listeners to hear from you?
It's a really great question. I think there's so much out there, and I think Ash and I have spoken about this between ourselves, on a number of times in the past around, if you go on to LinkedIn or anything nowadays, you will see every 5 minutes someone popping up, here's the latest and greatest, and use this solution or that solution. Gartner last year was talking around every 2 to 3 days there would be 1 or 2 new applications that are driven by AI, and I'm going to use inverted commas now because they just use the phrase AI rather than being very specific about what it is. These things are being built in the world. Now, interestingly, since then, you did see a ramp up of an increase of AI applications being built. But if you look over the last month, you've started to have the likes of Google and others starting to release their AI toolkits as part of your existing licensing and subscriptions. And therefore, the interesting take on that from an investor market perspective is you suddenly see all of these startups over the last 12, 18 months that have had billions invested in them have almost been wiped out overnight because the big behemoths have come in and gone, well, we've seen it, we've now developed it, put it into our tech stack, and actually, if you've already got a license with us, fantastic. There you go, have it for free. So it's just wiped so much out of that investment market. And I think so if we look at that market first, that's going to be an interesting one over the coming years to say, well, what do they start investing in? Because you're starting to lose that first mover advantage, and normally if you do an investment, you're normally looking at 5x, 10x of your investment. To have that taken away overnight, quite a big challenge for them.
Yeah.
And if we look at some of the other industries, it is going to be around more generally looking at what technology stacks have you already got in place? To Petra's point earlier, when we talk about people change, how much change have you got going on in your organisation already? Fundamentally, business, whether you're for profit, whether you're a not for profit, whether you're public sector, private sector, business in its simplest terms is, that fair value exchange. What is it you're doing, and what's the value that's going to come back from it? And I think all too often at a leadership level that gets forgotten, and the leadership get down into the minutiae and the detail very quickly. And part of our job as consultancy, I think for any consultant going forward, is to keep bringing them back up and go, what is it you're actually trying to achieve? You've all gone off down a new technology viewpoint. You're putting a lot of change fatigue on people, but what is it you actually exist for? Are you clear about where you're trying to get to, and what value are you giving to somebody?
Yeah, and I think look, I speak as a change manager. That's my background. Ironically, we're becoming more and more needed. But that sense of leadership, actually, and the work that I'm doing at the moment with Jennifer Bryan, which is to actually look at what a leader needs to actually become a really good change leader, and not as in a change manager, as in somebody that really understands how to lead change, because the role of the leader, the leadership role per se, has changed enormously, and change has probably become at least 50% of the leadership role these days, if not more. So thank you for that, Dave. I think that's some really good challenges there. But I'd like to bring in Jayne. I'm recognizing that Jayne's been sitting here for a little while, and I don't want to leave you out any longer, Jayne, because I know you've got a lot to say in some really brilliant areas here. And we talked about some of the broader challenges. I'd love to hear your view on perhaps some of the other challenges that perhaps haven't been mentioned on the podcast so far from your perspective, particularly around how we think about our planet, the environment and sustainability. But this is a really rapidly moving space. And I know that every time I talk to you, I'm completely blown away by something else I didn't know. And, we talk about the fact that the last conference you said out loud to everybody that we actually can't generate water, and yet it might take a bottle of water every time we slip into a ChatGPT or a Copilot moment. And then there was the other wonderful thing that I heard from you about the fact that, the data centers. And I remember talking to somebody recently about the fact that they were doing so much more online. And I was going, oh, well, that's great, right? Because, you don't have to have this, that, and the other. And they went, well, actually, no, we're just building about 20 data centers, and we've got to heat them or air condition them. And then suddenly you start to think about that, and you start thinking, oh, my God, all that electricity. And so, it's a trade-off, isn't it? And in fact, it was a lady who was doing sustainable websites, a lady called Sharon, who was doing sustainable websites. And I was saying, oh, you've got a great USP. And she said, well, not really, because we're still having to host them. So it's the balance, isn't it, about how do you really say you're sustainable? So with all of that in mind, tell us a little bit about what you think leaders need to hear from you, and what you think they need to pay attention to in the world of saving the planet.
In the next 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, yeah, no, a little bit more, I think, but yes.
So AI implementation affects absolutely everything we do, doesn't it? And it's not purely local, so it's not contained. We've talked a lot about how much it impacts through everything we do in an organisation and in our community. But it's not contained in a particular region, like, for instance, the Industrial Revolution was. And it wasn't, the Industrial Revolution started somewhere, and it rolled out from one location to another. AI is a global planetary thing. Nobody is going to be able to not be a part of it and not be influenced by it. And what interests me is about how we manage the different facets of AI and its interaction with the environment. So let's start with the really, really positive AI and the data centers, and how they can more rapidly analyze environmental information and assimilate it and give us some opportunities for engaging in a different future. That's hugely positive. And to do that more speedily than we've ever been able to do it before by human computation is just amazing. And it means we can think forward, and we can not just visualize, but we can model forward more than we've ever been able to do in the past. So I just wanted to start with AI could be really, really powerful in our environmental and health and well-being future. The next part of this are the things you were touching upon, which is it's the sort of the mechanics of the data centers and how much energy they use to cool those systems, how much water they use to cool their systems, where that hot water goes, where the energy comes from to generate the use of those systems, between the development of those systems and the modeling and the testing, and how much energy and water are used in that process.
Yeah.
And that needs thought, significant thought and significant development. So the second part of this really is about, and it's the interaction between land use and our health and well-being of our planet, and locally where we put those data systems and how we build those into sustainable communities in future, and how we build them into place, because those systems need to be based somewhere. Those data systems need to be based somewhere. And the big change, the big development, which has happened quite rapidly, is how government has embraced that future and is already thinking very strategically about where those data places are going to be placed within our communities, and
But can you say a
how.
bit more about that, Jayne? Because there'll probably be people listening to this podcast that aren't even aware of that, by the way that they consume news, or in fact that they don't consume news, because that's a whole other conversation. But could you just lay out a little bit about what the government are, sort of just some headlines? No, I don't want, to help people.
So at the time when we spoke before, we were being consulted over, engaged with a land use strategy for the UK. So I'm talking about the UK here. Since then, we've also been engaged with, and government is in development with, an industrial strategy. And that industrial strategy places AI as one of the pillars of industrial change in the next 10 to 15 years. And they are thinking, and what that industrial strategy talks about is being mindful of where those data centers are being placed within the country. So, for instance, we've got a pilot that have been announced recently where there is a data center in Culham, which is being developed as a pilot AI growth zone. That's just one of what will become many AI growth zones in the country. And those that positioning of those data centers is highly strategic. So, for instance, it's talking about, the strategy itself is talking about designated regions with streamlined planning and enhanced power access, and thinking about where that power comes from and how sustainable that power is, the power sources. So wind power, for instance, is a more sustainable source than coal generated sources. So thinking about how that power, where that power comes from within that, for that data center. And then we also have spoken about combined heat and power. So you need to cool those data centers, and water is used to cool those data centers. And by using that water, and in combined heat and power situations where that combined heat and power could be used to heat homes or heat another industry that's requiring it, or warm a horticultural space, or in order to grow crops and local food. That's where you begin to see the interconnection between AI development, other forms of land use.
So from a leadership perspective then, because some might argue that's all great and it's good that all of that's being laid out, and, obviously as the presenter here, I'm just being a little bit cynical deliberately, but so what does that really mean to me? What can I influence? What should I be, what's the change that I can make? What's the difference? I remember many, many moons ago when Al Gore was number 2 in the White House, and he sent somebody over to, I don't know, Petra, if you've ever heard this story, but he sent to the BBC leadership, and it was years before the word recycling was anything like we know it of today. And he made us put our hand up if we recycle. I think probably 2 or 3 people, to be honest, in the room actually put their hand up at that time. And he said, the reason why you don't recycle is because there's actually nothing in it for you to do it. There's no benefit to you to recycle, or you don't think there's any benefit. Of course there is, because you'll be helping to save the planet. But that's too big. That's like, it's so big that you couldn't possibly think that you could make put your toe in the water on that one, literally, than anything. But he said, if I said to you, for every 10 cans, whether it's beans or tomatoes or whatever, for every 10 cans that you use and wash up and throw away, I'm going to give you an LED light bulb, you might suddenly think it's worth keeping those cans and washing those cans and recycling those cans. And I'm talking about, this would have been over 15 years ago, this conversation. It's still in my mind. It's still something I think about every time I wash out a can of tomatoes or something, because I suddenly think, oh, that's really going to help the environment. I'm not going to get an LED light bulb, but I understand the process of why he's told me to do that. So I guess just bringing in other people, when Jayne first, but, what do you think we can say to the people listening to this podcast? What's the difference they can make in their leadership roles?
So I believe the people we're talking to in this podcast are the leaders in companies and businesses, and
Yes.
their companies and businesses will already have sustainability strategies. What they may not have considered in the past, or is not in their sustainability strategies, impact on the environment, and what they need to be aware of as they commission that tech and that data processing capability. There are, rather like if you're doing any other section of the business, you can ask for to understand the impact on the environment, whether it's water consumption, whether it's impact on wildlife, whether it's contribution towards net zero. You, as part of that strategy and the monitoring of that strategy and the impact of that strategy, you ask for that information. You should be, as leaders, you should be asking for that information from your AI providers.
Thank you, Jayne. Dave, Ash, is there anything you want to say at this point? I know that when we've spoken before, we've had quite a lively debate after Jayne's spoken. So let's bring in the lively debate at this point.
I'm going to go before Ash, and then I'll leave it to. So just to pick up on Jayne's point, I think if you talk about leadership team, obviously you've got a number of different roles in the leadership. I'm going to talk about it purely from the CIO's perspective, because I think this touches on Jayne's point really well. In a lot of organisations we work in, one of the challenges very often for CIO is what level of the organisation are they really in? Very often they don't always sit at the top table, at the board table. They might sit underneath the CFO or the COO or something like that. This gives the CIO a great opportunity to come to the board and say, look, as part of your ESG strategy, here's something we as IT can do to support you in achieving those sustainability goals, etc., etc. You can get it from your AI providers and things, but pushing it in the right direction, and how do you build it into not just your AI providers, but actually every component you might be putting in. So you're putting your building in, you're going to class it as a smart building, it's got all these other things built in. Actually, from an IT point of view, you can now get involved in property conversations like you've never been able to get involved before. Traditionally, so go back to higher education, put up a new building at university, the CIO gets involved to say, okay, where do we want our Wi-Fi access points, etc., etc. But now the CIO can be involved and say, we're going to make it as a smart building, we want to put this technology in, this is how we can do our reuse of heat, we might have our own little data centres on site, and we can use that heat now to heat something in the swimming pool, or friends of ours heating greenhouses. The CIO can get involved in a much broader conversation at an organisational level, not just about technology. So I think there's a huge opportunity from that side of the leadership team to get involved a lot more and to break down what all of us have been trying to do for the last however many years, is to stop, break down these silos in organisations where you've got, my property guy sat over here and I might have operation guy sat here and IT sat over there. This gives us a chance to bring that all together and go, we've got one strategy, and right back to the point we were making earlier, it is all part of the value exchange. What value are we going to get from this over and above just saying, oh, we've managed to automate some stuff? I'll hand it over to Ash now to really throw it in.
The expectation is high that I'm really going to throw this in, right? Let's do it. So I think some of these things that Jayne said are absolutely vital for companies to think about. And that is, what's the impact that you have on the environment, on sustainability, on all of these things. But they also need to be balanced with the value chain of the business. And for many businesses right now, they're thinking about, I need to do something in this space because all my competitors are, and I'm going to fall behind. I'm not going to exist as a business. That's an existential threat. And when then we think about sustainability more broadly, we need to be thinking about these things in a way that's relevant to businesses. So, for example, a business is going to go down the route of using a particular GPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever it is. Those models have been trained. The energy consumption in training vastly outweighs what day-to-day usage of these models is going to be. So this, to some degree, is sunk cost. It happened. It's happened in the past. And all of the market models have a similar energy profile when it comes to training. So that's been done. So what can businesses actually do in their choices? And if a business says, I want to roll out Copilot to 200-300 people in my organization and see what they do to use it, it's a very valuable thing to be able to evaluate the use, not only sustainably, but also in terms of impact, in terms of use cases, and in terms of strategic priorities. That's all something that should be done, but it should be done in a way that's measurable for the business. So if I make a choice as a business that I'm going to deploy Midjourney, for example, for image generation, and I'm going to have a designer in the US make images on their laptop sitting in their house that has a huge carbon footprint, or I'm going to go offshore and get somebody in India to do it where they have a very low carbon footprint. These are very different choices, and making these choices at the same time as flying all your executives for a retreat for a weekend around the world, and at the same time as saying to all your workers, you must come back into the office, you must take the train, you must take the bus, you must drive, and you must sit in this building that has terrible energetics, and we have to heat this building, we have to cool it, where you could just be working at home on your laptop. You know, all of these different decisions need to come together when we think about sustainability, just the AI piece. As you're cleaning out, I think Sean Locke said this one time when he was doing comedy, he was saying, they're cleaning out a Marmite jar while someone else is flying to the shops. It doesn't make any sense. All of these things need to be thought about together.
I think they do, and I'm going to bring Jayne in here because I can see her waving her hand. But just before I do, Jayne, the other thing I'd just say the balance of, because I'm the human side of life in terms of my role. And, you know, I totally get all of that about the carbon footprint and thinking about flying executives across the world to a retreat and all that, seriously. But there is a real problem with not bringing people back to the office at the moment. You know, the level of loneliness at the moment, the rate of suicides that people are having, the fact that people are not gaining knowledge. And we talked about, you know, university students. I'm doing a big project on that right now. University students coming into work and actually learning from their elders, understanding how important it is to have a knowledge bank of people at work. So we're not going to solve it here, by the way, but I just want to throw that in for our listeners, because if I'm a leader in a corporate environment right now, worrying about FOBO or FOMO, as Daniel Priestley calls it now, he calls it FOBO, because of the bots. Have you got a bot?
Okay.
Are you going to? Yeah, right. So he's now talking about it from that perspective. But I just want to throw that in, because if people are listening to this and can't speak back to us, they might be shouting at the podcast at this point, well, yeah, I know, and I haven't been able to see my team for 3 weeks, or I haven't been able to do this because I'm constrained by. So I just want to lay that on here for people to think about, because I think there is, go on, and then I'm going to Jayne. Go on, I wanted this debate to get a bit lively, so it's fine.
On that point, if everything you've just said, I understand, there is a human side to being back in the office, but benefits versus sustainability versus risks, all of these things come together in the debate. And if on the AI side we're having the sustainability debate while also thinking about benefits, why don't we have the same debate when it comes to going back into the office, when it comes to flying around the world? We need to have both of those things, and that's my point. It needs to be balanced.
Jayne, please come back in.
Well, I'm going to agree. I am not suggesting that AI is treated any differently to anything else we do. What I'm saying is, don't put AI in a box that says it doesn't have an environmental impact, because it absolutely does. And it has a big environmental footprint. And if we are going to, I started at the top of this podcast with thriving, healthy communities here on Earth. If we are all going to thrive and we're not going to leave anybody behind, and somebody's going to suffer as a result of somebody else's actions, then we need to think holistically about our footprint. And companies do that through their ESG, or are supposed to do that through their ESG strategies. So I think there's already a place within a company, within a business, to consider AI alongside its other actions. I think Dave and I have talked about this before, and Dave touched upon it. At the moment, more people need to be engaged in that ESG strategy, and they need to understand their role in it, and they need to be empowered to be part of the conversation and not just be told to get on and do something, because everything has an action, everything has a reaction, every action has a reaction in environmental terms.
And I think that every action has a reaction is really so important about the unintended or the intended consequences of anything that we do in our lives. And it's something that we don't really say very much on. Funnily enough, I was listening to David Priestley the other day. Sorry, bit of a fan. Probably should be, but anyway, I am, if he's listening. But he was saying that actually you have to have longer podcasts now, interestingly. So when I started making podcasts, people were saying to me, you should only do about 15 minutes, but apparently you need to do more than an hour now so that it can't be cloned, and that this becomes, therefore, a trusted podcast. I've got one last question, really, and that's, you know, anybody listening to this podcast is probably thinking, well, we're mid-2025 and we're all thinking about, God, how the hell do we get there? It's August. And we're heading well into 2026, and we're looking at our pipelines for 2026-27 right now. We can't escape the headlines. We've had a good conversation about that here on the podcast today. We know that we're still seeing a huge amount of layoffs, a particularly big eye on restructuring right now. We've talked about just now, thankfully, about where our workforces and our leadership really need to grasp things and perhaps get involved in more ways. And I actually have to say, I've seen quite a lot of organisations actually encouraging young people onto board thinking. And I know we haven't really spoken about that, but I think reverse mentoring and bringing young people into advisory boards or boards throughout the organisation is a really fantastic initiative, actually. And we shouldn't underestimate the thinking of young people and what they can bring to those boards. So I'll start with that. But what do you see as the headlines of things that we should be, or the things that we should be thinking about for 2025, 26, and then sort of just into the early stages of 27, just so that we can sort of tie the final loose ends of this podcast together? Ash, can I start with you first on that? Is that okay?
Sure. I think the big issues and the big things we should be thinking about are going to remain the same as they are now, and that is that we have increased capability. That capability is just going to increase on the tech side. The questions are going to be, how do we as a society cope with these things? How do we make sure our regulatory environments are responsible enough to cope with the things that we need to implement? How do organizations think about these things in a way that is ethical and responsible and doesn't lead to swinging job cuts that have a catastrophic effect on society? And if they do, then what's the alternative? Think about universal basic income, upskilling, and all of these other things. So I think impact versus tech is still going to be the big debate as we go through the next couple of years.
Great. Dave, what's your take on that?
Yeah, you mentioned UBI. I'll leave UBI to one side because that's a whole different debate. I think interestingly, if you look at post-COVID, there was a number of trials done in various countries around different working weeks. You go for 3-day working weeks, 4-day working weeks, etc. You've had some companies that have said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna scrap everyone's leave. You can have as much leave as you like as long as you do your job." Interestingly, if you look at some of the latest research on some of those things, rather than creating this beautiful environment that people would want to work in, it actually created a lot more stress in employees, especially the unlimited leave one, which Virgin had tried, because people suddenly didn't have the guardrails in place. They was like, hang on, so
Routine.
I don't have an amount of leave. I could have as much as I like, but I've got to do my job. I end up taking less leave because I feel guilty then to take things. And I think that's still going to be the human element of all of this, which is how do we build that forward? So I'll go back to the phrase used a few times now, which is using these things to amplify the human is absolutely, certainly in the next 2 years, the way we're going to go. And it's not just about AI, actually. It's the age-old conversation across technology, whether you talk about lean or anything else, is it comes back to the hard bit of human culture and change and curiosity and being brave and having debates. That's where we need to keep these conversations going. It's an enabler. Right? AI is an enabler. It's not there to solve all these things by default. We as humans need to find ways to bring that in. As leaders, leaders need to get around this and be really clear about, this year, next year, 2027, what are we really trying to do as an organisation, and how do all of these enablers help us get there, rather than start with enablers and kind of reverse engineer everything to that.
Jayne, your thoughts?
So in addition to that key point about who's working on your sustainability strategy, who are you engaging within your business on the sustainability, who's contributing to it, how broad are you sweeping? In addition to that, I think I would ask and keep an eye on other communities and how businesses are interacting, the ecosystems within businesses, not just the ecosystems within business, but between businesses. And that point that Ash made about the environmental footprint for training an AI model far exceeds its rollout. I think I understood that correctly. If there are multiple organizations doing developing very similar models and training using environmental footprint to train those models, then we are doing the same thing multiple times and using the environment more than we need to. So is there an ecosystem of learning and training that we can consider putting in place so that we're sharing the benefits across businesses? There is an element of that, of the competition that we'll need to get over, but we need to be focusing on the fact that we need to live sustainably here on this planet as communities of individuals. We're designed to live within communities. Our health and well-being benefits from being within a community. And it's the community that we leave for our children and our grandchildren when we're not here.
Yes, and legacy, isn't it, really? And about having that mindset that it doesn't really matter if you're on your way out, it's about everybody else that's left. And I think that's something that quite a lot of people I'm in conversation with are really thinking hard about now. What is it that I want to be part of in terms of purpose, but also offer and give back to my children and my grandchildren? And very, very interestingly, on a podcast that I've actually just released last month, a lady called Marsha Schenk, for those of you who didn't hear it, she talks about the fact that she is actually building an eco farm and managing this exact. She's feeding over 300 people a day with the food that she's growing from the farm. And her legacy, because thankfully for her grandson is a massive environmentalist, he is going to take over the farm when she eventually does leave the planet. And it's actually become a really big family plan. Fascinating a podcast with her about why we need to think about the society that we're in, the way that we operate. She said a lone baboon is a dead baboon. You talking about communities there, Jayne. I think all of that ties in with actually a lot of the conversations I've been having with others on the podcast.
I think though, Lou, we do have to be brave.
Yes, be brave. Yes.
Business ecosystem does not work in this way. That's why I have raised it, because it's...
Yes, and I think I just would say as well, because Marsha said this as well, so she's actually echoing everything you're saying. And one of the things she talks about is that, at the end of the day, business was a game that was made up by humans. The difference is that we're still using the same rules and we haven't actually started to change those rules. And it's about having courage and bravery to actually say, which is what you're saying, all of you are saying, but, don't just follow the sheep. Don't just carry on the same way as everybody else and do what everybody else is doing. When is somebody going to actually be brave enough to say, this is the way we need to operate, and this is the way we need to solve some of the problems of the world, whether it's Bill Gates leaving his entire estate to cure polio in Africa as one example. But what is it that we can do to help support the planet, the people, the people that we have in our industry? Petra, sorry, I think you needed the last word on this.
Yes, I would say, from my perspective, I think when people talk about AI, what we seem to be hearing a lot, is about people talking about efficiency, they talk about productivity, all of those kind of words, but I think the thing about, into the future, it's not just about sort of how we can become more efficient, how we can become more productive. It's not about what AI can do for this organization, what AI can do for this company, what AI can do. It's about kind of like what kind of organization and what kind of society do we want to build with AI as part of it. It's looking at it from that, it's looking at it from a place of values. Like, what are the values that we hold that we want AI to help us with, to help us achieve? It's not about AI at the core. AI is there to assist us in how we decide what we decide we want to be as a society, as an organization. So I think that's the really key thing. But AI is here to, using AI to sort of enhance what we do, what we do, not replace it. And yeah. And also it's about making sure that, whatever strategies that we have around AI are not just about this operational efficiency and productivity and things, but it's also about things like sustainability. It's about things like trust, public trust, things like inclusion. It's those sort of things that are core to our values as humans. So those should be what our AI strategy should be serving.
Well, thank you once for such a interesting, insightful conversation, really. We didn't have quite the heated debate we've had in the past, but maybe we've all got to know each other's points of view and sort of have a different way of looking at it now, the more we widen the conversation. But I think, in terms of my takeaways for everybody, if I were to offer some of the things back to the listener in terms of reflections, which if you just give me a minute, I wouldn't mind just calling out for the sake of the listener here. I normally do this later on, actually, a few weeks later when I listen back, but I think it'd be good to capture them right now. I think this whole thing about don't worry about FOMO, don't think that somebody's doing it better than you. Carry on, go the way you think you need to do. I really loved what Jayne said about building a learning organisation, but building a wider learning society. I think the opportunity to share learning, and certainly with the way that tech is now and the way that we are communicating through podcasts and other things, I think to have a learning society around this would be really, really valuable, to learn from others and to take that and to build a society that actually isn't constantly testing the same thing and actually taking the data. And I think data, as we know, is really key to anything being successful in the future. So having that, I think looking at the tech impact on the Commission, what the government's doing, getting across what the government's doing, the challenges and how leadership and staff now can actually get involved and actually have a voice. I really liked what you said about that, Jayne, about the fact that we've got the opportunity for a values exchange at any level within the organisation, but particularly at the leadership level. And also we talked about benefits versus sustainability versus risk, and actually understanding the three of those together, I think, was another one. The fact that we shouldn't put everything that we have into one AI box, that we still need to build a community of employees and leaders that come from the bottom to the top, and that may not be quite as many, but we look to see how AI might potentially integrate with some of the roles to enhance or to even just speed up somebody's role, to be able to give them an opportunity to learn a skill that perhaps they wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn before. Thinking about environmental footprints, obviously we've talked about that. Everybody getting across that ESG planning, which we've said, but I think the 5 things in the box, just to finish, which was, impact versus tech, using this to amplify the human. I really love that. I think that was an Ash moment. Other communities, which we've said, really think about the community and the communities that you're working in, the constant learning organisation, learning from others, sharing benefits, we love to live in communities. Let's continue to build sustainability within that community. And then values, which, as Petra will know more than anyone, absolutely core to my entire existence. I have done 3 culture change programs in values. So what society do we want to build? What society do we want to be? And what business do we want to be? And how do we want to continue our legacy in building the planet with trust and innovation? And I'm going to end with Jayne's words, which is to be brave. So to everyone listening, thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, I will leave the opportunity to reach out to all of my panelists on my YouTube channel. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Ash, Petra, Jayne, and Dave, especially for inviting all of us back and hosting us in Alton Towers. It was great. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.